Why does pain stay in the blood for so long? The question hit Marcus in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. The kind of day where nothing feels heavy until something small cracks open a memory. He was sitting alone, staring at the email that held his DNA results, expecting answers that would finally give him a sense of belonging. A country, a tribe, a name older than the one America gave his family. But what he found wasn't clarity. It was confusion, and a quiet ache that felt older than him. Before I go deeper into his story, this is Simmons, and welcome to Chronicles of Black. If you feel connected to stories like this, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and stay with me, because your voice matters here. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his thumb across the smooth edge of the table as if the wood could steady him. He had waited months for this moment. He thought the results would answer the questions that had lived under his skin since childhood. Instead, he felt something twist inside him, something he didn't even have words for yet. The numbers didn't point to one homeland. They scattered him across continents, a percentage from here, another from there, pieces that didn't match the story he'd been told to believe. He searched the screen for something that felt familiar, but all he found was a reminder that his past wasn't clean or simple. It was fractured, rearranged, forced into shapes it was never meant to take. He closed his eyes, and memories rose without warning. The first day of second grade, a white teacher staring at the attendance sheet and stumbling over Reed as if his name was too heavy for her tongue. Kids reaching for his hair without permission, laughing like he was some kind of exhibit. The officer who stopped him at 16 because he fit the description, even though he'd been on his way home with a backpack full of homework. Those moments piled up over the years, tiny cuts he learned to ignore, but he always felt something deeper behind them, something he couldn't explain, a sense that he wasn't just carrying his own experiences, he was carrying stories that didn't belong to him alone, stories passed down through blood, through silence, through generations that survived things he struggled to imagine. He used to wonder why he felt tired even when life seemed calm, why certain words hit him harder than others, why he felt a pull toward places he'd never been. His mother once told him, "Baby, some things don't start with you," and he believed her, even if he never fully understood what she meant. But now, looking at his DNA results, he understood something else. His confusion wasn't new. It was inherited. It lived beneath the surface, waiting for a moment to rise. He whispered to himself, "Why does our DNA look the way it does? What happened to it?" And for the first time in a long time, he realized he was ready to find the answer, even if the truth came with pain. Marcus sat with the glow of the screen fading into the evening, and for a moment he felt like he was staring through time itself. He thought back to school, the way history books squeezed centuries of suffering into a neat little paragraph. A few lines about slavery, a picture of a cabin, a sentence about hardships, and then the page turned as if the story had ended cleanly. But DNA doesn't turn the page. DNA doesn't soften the truth. It remembers everything, even when the world tries to forget. He whispered to himself that his ancestors didn't leave diaries, but their bodies did. Their stories lived in him, whether he asked for them or not. He thought about how those textbooks never mentioned the families ripped apart, like they were furniture to be moved from one place to another. No one told him that names were stolen not just from records, but from the mouths of children who grew up answering to something that wasn't theirs. Whole languages disappeared in the space of one generation, and with them, the rhythm of a people who once knew exactly where they came from. He felt his chest tightened. He imagined mothers who held their babies knowing they might not wake up in the same place tomorrow. Fathers who looked at their sons and wondered if the world would ever let them stand tall. Brothers and sisters separated by auctions that cared nothing for love or blood. Those losses never made it into the school books, but they made it into him. Then there was the part no one wanted to say out loud, the part that still makes people shift in their seats. The truth that many Black Americans carry European DNA not because of romance, but because the enslaved had no power to refuse. Marcus didn't have to read the full history to know what that meant. The percentages in his results, little slivers of ancestry he couldn't trace to any warm family memory, came from wounds, not bonds, from violence, not choice. He stared at the screen again, feeling a heaviness he couldn't shake. Those numbers weren't random. They were reminders of women who endured horrors quietly, because silence was safer than speaking. They passed that silence down, generation to generation, until it reached him in the form of a percentage he never asked for. He thought about how many Black families can't trace their roots past 5 or 6 generations, not because they don't try, but because the records stop. They vanish. They were never written in the first place, lives erased on paper even while their children lived on. Marcus once tried to build a family tree for a school project. and he remembered the shame of only getting halfway before running into a wall. His classmates handed in charts that stretched across pages. His fit into a corner. Now, years later, he finally understood why. His history wasn't lost. It was taken, hidden, buried under systems that were designed to make sure people like him never knew who they came from. But his DNA, the one thing no auction block or law or master could fully control, kept the truth anyway. Marcus closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, feeling a quiet rage settle inside him, not the kind that makes you shout, the kind that sits behind your ribs and burns steady, reminding you that your story is deeper than the one you were taught. His ancestors carried pain they never spoke of, and yet they survived long enough for him to sit here now, with the chance to understand what they lived through. He whispered again, softer this time. They didn't get to keep their names, but they kept us. And as the room darkened around him, he felt the weight of history resting in his chest, not to crush him, but to remind him that he wasn't standing alone. Marcus opened the results again, letting his eyes drift over the numbers he'd been avoiding. The company tried to make everything look cheerful, bright colors and clean charts, as if the story behind them wasn't soaked in centuries of struggle. But he wasn't seeing colors. He was seeing pieces of people, pieces of places, pieces of pain. There it was, a wide stretch of West African ancestry, broken into regions he'd only heard about in passing, names of kingdoms that once had their own languages, their own sciences, their own pride, places his blood remembered, even when the world tried to make him forget. He traced the line with his finger, imagining the faces of people who never had the chance to pass down their stories the way other families did. Yet somehow, their echo reached him anyway. Another line caught his eye, a small percentage, linking him to native communities. He sat with that for a moment, thinking of friendships born in shared survival, in stolen lands and stolen freedoms. Two histories running side by side, intersecting in ways textbooks rarely mention. He wondered what kind of world might have existed if those two groups had met under different circumstances. In a country that didn't build itself on taking everything from them, then the European percentage stared back at him like a shadow in the corner of the room. He didn't need a scientist to explain how that got there. It wasn't a love story. It wasn't a choice. It was the part of history people tried to soften, to blur, to hide behind polite words. But DNA doesn't lie. It doesn't hide the truth to make anyone comfortable. It carries it, quietly and permanently. He breathed out, realizing something he hadn't put into words before. This mix inside him wasn't random. It was survival encoded. A record of everything his ancestors endured, everything they fought through, every tear and every breath they refused to let be stolen. His DNA was the closest thing he would ever have to a family archive, and it was written in a language older than any document. He thought about how researchers often describe Black American DNA as one of the rarest mixtures on the planet, not because of beauty or variety in some cheerful, decorative way, but because of centuries of chaos, resistance, and forced blending, a collision of cultures that never should have been forced together, yet somehow created a people who learned to rise in spite of everything that tried to break them. He could feel something shift inside him, a quiet awakening, the kind that doesn't need music or applause, just truth settling into place. He felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. His DNA wasn't a mystery anymore. It was evidence, proof that the bodies of his ancestors held on to their story even when laws, systems, and society tried to tear it away. He whispered, "This is history written in cells." And once the words left his mouth, he felt the weight of them. His DNA wasn't accidental. It wasn't incomplete. It was whole, even if the world wanted him to believe otherwise. America didn't keep their names. America didn't keep their records. But their bodies kept everything that mattered. Their blood held the truth and carried it forward one generation at a time. Long enough for Marcus to open a web page on a quiet night and finally understand the story the country never wanted to write down. He sat back in his chair, feeling the truth settle deeper than before. "My DNA didn't forget," he said under his breath. Even when everything around it tried to. Marcus kept staring at the results, but his mind drifted to the world outside his window, a world that still treated men who looked like him like a question mark. He thought about all the moments that didn't make headlines, the small humiliations that people shrugged off as misunderstandings, yet every one of them felt like an echo of something old, something carried in the blood. He wondered why his heartbeat always jumped during a traffic stop, even when he knew he'd done nothing wrong, why he swallowed his words, forced his hands to stay still, and prayed the officer saw him as human. He remembered a night years ago when he got pulled over for having a dim taillight. Even though both lights were clearly on, the officer's hand hovered near his holster the entire time. Marcus did everything right, every movement slow, every yes sir steady. He made it home, but the fear stayed with him. It stayed in his chest the way an old injury stays in the bone. He thought about job applications too, how he once shortened his full name because a friend told him, "You'll get more callbacks that way." And it worked. The same resume suddenly earned polite emails, interviews, interest he never got before. It was a reminder that in this country, even your name had to shrink for you to be seen. Schools weren't much different. He remembered teachers rushing through Black history like it was a side note, something to get through before the real curriculum. A few days on Dr. King, a poster of Rosa Parks, then back to the same lessons that centered everyone but people like him. No one talked about the strength of his ancestors. No one talked about the brilliance of African civilizations. Everything was reduced to pain, and even that pain was softened until it felt distant and quiet. But DNA never softened anything. It carried the truth even when the textbooks refused to. As Marcus sat there, the frustration rose in him, slow but steady. He realized his DNA wasn't just a map of the past. It was a reflection of the present. It carried memories of survival because America still made black people prove their worth in ways others never had to think about. He remembered taking his son to the mall one weekend. They walked into a store, and almost immediately, Marcus noticed the security guard drifting behind them, pretending to look at shelves he clearly didn't care about. His son tugged on his sleeve and whispered, "Dad, why is he following us?" Marcus forced a smile and said, "Just stay close to me." "All right." But inside, he felt that familiar burn, a reminder that even innocence wasn't enough to protect a black child from suspicion. His mother's voice came back to him too, sharp and tired. "Keep your hands visible when the police walk by," she used to say. "Don't reach for anything fast." He learned those rules before he learned how to drive. They weren't instructions. They were survival tactics. A generational inheritance passed down like a family secret. And then there was his grandfather. Marcus remembered sitting on the porch with him one humid summer night, listening as the old man spoke in a low voice about the South he grew up in. Stories he never wanted to relive but didn't want Marcus to forget. Stories about signs that told him where he couldn't go. Men who looked at him like they owned the ground he walked on, and neighbors who vanished without explanation. His grandfather told those stories with his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if he could still see the memories hiding there. Marcus realized all of it, the fear, the caution, the silence had been handed down the same way DNA travels. Not as destiny, but as truth. A truth that lived in the way his family moved through the world. The way he moved through the world. He ran a hand over the table again and whispered, "It didn't start with me." And for the first time, he understood that the past wasn't behind him. It lived inside him, shaping every breath, every choice, every warning whispered from one generation to the next. But as that thought settled, something else rose with it. Not anger alone, but purpose. A sense that if the echoes of trauma could pass down, then so could the strength that carried his family this far. And he wasn't done carrying it. Marcus sat with everything he'd uncovered, every bruise of history. Every echo of survival land felt something shift. Not pain this time. Not confusion. Something steadier. Something warm. For the first time since he opened that email, he didn't feel scattered or broken. He felt whole. He felt chosen by a past that refused to fade. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "My DNA isn't damaged. It's brilliant." And as the words settled, he felt the truth of them rise in his chest like a breath he'd been holding his entire life. His blood carried pieces of African kingdoms that once stood taller than any empire recorded in places where scholars studied the stars, where builders shaped cities long before anyone wrote about the New World. His blood held the endurance of those who survived the Middle Passage, people who endured a hell nobody should have survived, yet somehow did. They didn't break. They didn't surrender. They lived long enough to pass their strength forward. His DNA carried the courage of elders who whispered lessons in the dark because reading was forbidden, the wisdom of men who plotted escape under the cover of night, the calm of mothers who rocked their babies to sleep inside wooden cabins, singing faith into them when the world tried to take everything else away. Those lullabies, that courage, that faith, it traveled through time and found its way into him. He thought of his mother, his grandfather, even the ancestors he would never know by name. They weren't ghosts. They were the foundation beneath his feet. Their resilience shaped his smile, his walk, his fire, his hope. Every survival instinct he carried wasn't a flaw, it was inherited genius. He leaned forward, as if speaking to someone right across from him. "If you're listening to this," he said softly, "especially if you're black, you need to hear this. You are not here by accident. You are not random. You're not pieced together from broken chapters. His voice grew steadier. You come from the strongest bloodline in this country, a bloodline that lived through storms and still created joy, created music, created movement, created families, created hope. He felt that fire again, hot, but not angry, empowering, like everything he'd ever wondered about himself suddenly had a place to belong. He understood now that every scar he carried, visible or hidden, wasn't weakness. It was evidence, living proof that his people refused to disappear. He let out a long breath. Maybe the reason our DNA is so unique is simple, he said. We come from people who refuse to disappear. And once he spoke it out loud, he felt everything inside him lift. He thought again about the young boy he used to be, the one confused by the silence in his family tree, the one embarrassed during classroom lessons, the one who didn't know why certain fears lived in him so deeply. He wished he could reach back and tell that boy, there's nothing missing in you. There's more history in your blood than most people could ever imagine. Marcus smiled, a small, tired smile full of pride. He knew healing wouldn't come all at once. It would come in moments like this, quiet, powerful, honest, moments where the past and present finally met and shook hands. He looked up, knowing someone out there needed to hear his next words. If you're part of this story, if you carry this blood, stand tall, because everything they tried to erase is exactly what lives in you. And when you walk through this world, you're walking with millions behind you. He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle, then added gently, if this spoke to you, if it made you feel something in your chest, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, share your experience. This is Simmons, and you're part of Chronicles of Black now.